Hi everyone. In this screencast, I'm going to talk about three things: the tragedy of the commons, mostly the as reflected in the Grand Canyon river lottery system and river use system in general, and what are the options that we have. So, first, I want to start with the economic theory of the tragedy of the commons. And I first learned about this in an environmental policy class I took in undergrad at Western State Colorado University, and we read an article about this, and I think it's a really good economic theory to apply to environmental policy and environmental issues when it comes to use. So, if you Google this theory, you can obviously learn more about it through the Wikipedia definition and other ones. But the key thing is this photo of this field here and the example it denotes, which is if you have in the economic theory, if you have uh, a public field that everyone can graze their cattle on in a farming area, then all the farmers will graze their cattle on that field because it's a common area, and it will turn to dirt, and there'll be no more resource for the public to use to feed their cattle, right? And the way to avoid that is to um, create policy. A society could create policy to preserve that resource and allocate it more evenly amongst the users, and hopefully a way that works for everyone involved, right? That and in doing so, it prevents this piece having from happening. The individual users acting independently according to their own self-interest and behave contrary to the common good of all users. So, and this may not be intentional, right? The cattle farmer might not intentionally be trying to take all the grass for his cattle. He could just be putting them there, or she could just be putting them there, and that could happen. So, uh, so that's the frame I want to look at this data from. So I want to start on the first page, and I'll link this spreadsheet with comment permissions in this screencast. So I want to start with this graph. So in the Grand Canyon, think of that as like our pasture for people who, in the river corridor specifically, so people who want to go and see that area. It's You have to apply for a permit lottery, and every year, except for a couple in the last 10, more and more people have applied, while the number of permits has basically stayed the same. And so access to this common area is getting harder and harder, and we have a situation where um, again, individuals acting in their own self-interest, they want a Grand Canyon permit, they want to visit this place. But as more and more individuals apply, it gets harder for everyone to access the resource privately. There is another way you can access this resource, and that's through a commercial trip. And it's a total different. To talk about this in a short amount of time is difficult, but quickly the difference between a commercial trip and a private trip is on a commercial trip you pay an outfitter and you pay guides to tour you through the canyon. Oftentimes the majority of commercial trips are on motorboats or motor rafts. Basically, they're big, and but there's some that are on human powered dories. You're a passenger. As a passenger, you don't drive the motorboat or you don't row the raft if you're on a human powered craft. That your guide does that. You don't pick all your hikes. There's a lot of good hiking in the Grand Canyon from the river corridor. The guides kind of choose that, and there's a lot of luxury in the commercial trip. The guides set up the toilets on the river and pick those toilets up and put them on the rafts. They cook all the meals, and they basically, are the servants to the passengers. Uh, on a private trip, the there is no guide, so you create your own itinerary. You have a set amount of days, usually around, say the average is, let's just say 19 days year round, and the summer trips are shorter. In the winter, they're a little longer, a range between say 16 and 25 days. Um, and and so in the so for private trips, you have all the freedom and also all the responsibility. Trips are from 1 to 16 people, and you're basically at a full size group. You're like a floating house in a community and roommates, and everyone, in a healthy group, everyone takes turns cooking and cleaning, and oftentimes people will take turns rowing the rafts in the flat water and the rapids, and it's a much more shared communal experience. So those are the difference between the two. So what we're looking at here um, is lottery application volume, and this is for um, non-commercial trips. You don't have to get a permit to go on a commercial trip, but you just have to have the capital available. You just have to have money. I would say I think they cost around at the low end maybe 3,000 and probably at the high end 5,000 depending on their options. I know on some options you can fly out on a helicopter, but full disclosure, I haven't actually done a commercial trip. So here we go. In 2008, you have 194 permits, and in 2000 and 2,304 applications in the main lottery. Say someone gets a permit in one of these lotteries and then cancels, they have what they call a follow-up lottery. A better name for that is a cancellation lottery. So say 100 people cancel their permits, there'll be a follow-up lottery to hold for those. Um, but typically, there aren't huge huge amounts of cancellations. And when they do have cancellation lotteries, you see similar patterns in the data. Um, Usually, if there's 100 cancellations, there's um, typically over 1,000 applications for those 100 dates. So the odds of getting a permit aren't easy. Um, and I'm not actually in this screencast going to go into how the lottery system works. I really want to focus on just supply permits and demand and how that's increasing. But in another screencast, I can go into that in more detail. And if you're curious about how that works too, you can Google it and find it on the Grand Canyon's website. So what we can see here is um, application numbers are increasing year over year, and there's been this really large increase. There was actually a little bit of a decrease in 2013 and 2014, and from there it's just bumped up. And I got all the information for this sheet. It comes from public data, and here's the link to all the data from the National Park Service's website. And here's in these columns the number of permits available in the applications. And then I'm not going to go into probability in this either. I'll just leave that there because it's complicated. Um, but here's a neat increases from the previous year. You can see how 2018 was a, a powerful year in statistics for the application demand, because for the first time ever, it almost doubled. We went from 639, 600 99, 633. Never before in the lottery's history had it really gone much over 600, close, almost broke 700, and then boom, 2018, something happened. We have 1,100 applicants. And maybe this will change. Maybe next year we'll go back to 600. Uh, but I don't know. What we can do is we can look at, well, what's going to happen if we increase at the same rate we have over the last. This lottery system's been in place since 2006, but the data really got better in around 2008 because while it took about 2 years from the transition from their old system, which was a wait list, and that transition petered out, is still petering out, but it affected the data pretty significantly in the year 2006 and 2007. And I want to say the 2006 year wasn't even a full year. So the good place to start with this data analysis typically is 2008. So going back to our forecasted volume column, and we can see that we can see my equations here and what I did. So what this looks at is the increase from increase in application volume from 2018, the year 2018, minus the volume from 2008, and then it's adding them at an equal rate, at a proportional rate in 10-year increments. So the idea is if demand stays the same, what's volume? If it grows in an equal rate, what will the volume be 10 years from now and 20 years from now? And this is what we're looking at. And the permits are going to stay the same. So you can see the tragedy of the commons remains, right? We have ever increasing number of people applying for the same number of permits. And so eventually odds of winning a permit, because the volume will be so high, will be such that it will be statistically improbable for users to get a permit for the vast majority of applicants. Like over 99% of applicants will lose all lotteries 10 years and 38 years from now. That's what this forecast shows. Now things could happen, right? Demand could go down, but that's not what this trend shows, right? And it would need to go down significantly for this forecast to be wrong. So what do we do? There's a couple things. We could, if the goal is to increase access, which I think it is, the park can increase the amount of permits available to private groups, and they can do that in my mind, one of two ways or both of those ways. They can if they wanted to keep the same number of permits available for both commercial and private trips, they could take some permits from the commercial use group and give those to the non-commercial group, or they could just give more to one group, and so they could just give more to the private group, say, or they could give more to both. So the way the numbers are set is this red line here, this permit line is supposed to be the carrying capacity, or the private group carrying capacity, or non-commercial carrying capacity, and then there's the commercial carrying capacity. And added together, those are supposed to be the amount of impact the canyon can take for people to have trips that aren't crowded, and for the ecosystem to be safe and sustainable. So as it stands now, the park believes that they're at, the management system places the use at carrying capacity. So it might not actually be that feasible, and maybe it might, or it might be. It's open for discussion to increase permits for both groups or one group or the other. And that brings me to the commercial use statistics. So since this new system was implemented, both groups got more permits, and the park doesn't just count permits as like trips launching. They also look at two other data categories: user days and the amount of recreational passengers from both groups. And the way the allocation is set up, for again reasons I won't go into in this video screencast, is that the commercial group gets more in they get more in all categories. They get more trips, they get more user days, and they get more recreational passengers for a lot of reasons. And some people see this as unfair. So let's jump into the data, because that's really what I want to show here. And again, all this is available on these links here. I have another video that I'll link in this one that shows how I compiled this data. So again, going back to a bigger goal here, which is that I want to make this information accessible to the general public, and hopefully work with folks who see this and are like, hey, you could do this better if you present it this way or that way. And we, almost work as a community, open source community, to really make this data as human readable and understandable as possible. So let's start with, where should we start? These two. Let's start with these two graphs. So we have charts. Sorry. Here we have the average number of additional commercial days, trips, and passengers running the Grand Canyon compared to private non-commercial trips. So this is, the 68.2% is the average amount more passengers. So if the commercial group gets about 70% more passengers than the non-commercial group. The average trips launching, so these are like permits, right? The commercial group has gotten 23.3% more on average. And then the average user days, which is, I believe this is defined. I'm going to define it loosely. I'm not looking at the NPS definition right now. And correct me if I'm wrong if you know this in the comments. A user day is defined as one person being in a Grand Canyon in the park on a trip for one day, commercial or private. And so they have more days. So that's the average. Here's the latest year available. 2016 is not available yet, and we're in 2017, so that's obviously not available. So you can see slightly less recreational passengers, but more user days, and more trips less trips launching. So I'm not actually sure why they have so many more user days in 2015 and why that's increased over time. But we can see 2015, 17%, 2014, 11.5%, almost 11%, and 13. 12 is 8%, 2011, 7.29. And this is weird, 2010, I had to check this number, only 1% more user days, which I don't know if that's a mistake or what's causing that. 2009, same deal, only slightly more user days. I wonder if this was related to the recession in 2008, but they had the same amount of trips launching, maybe in similar amounts of passengers. So I guess I'm not understanding the relationship between user days and recreational passengers as well as I could. And there's the averages down there. So big picture, the commercial group gets more than the recreational group, or the non-commercial group, private group. And so if it was more, say if it was equal, that would obviously help here, or you just give both groups more, you know. So I don't know what the solution is, and I know that this is a very hot topic for some people, and I also know that there's probably the vast majority of people who go um, down the Grand Canyon haven't don't know about this. If we look at these um, 18,000 plus 6,000, or 18,000 plus 18,500 plus 6,200, around 25,000 people per year going down. And the vast majority of them probably don't know about this issue. And I hope this helps illustrate that from the tragedy of the commons perspective, and just provide a little bit more background on exactly what all this data the park provides shows about what's going on. So I hope that helps, and that's it. Thanks. Bye.